think
There we
I
go.
think a lot of people would relate to your saying that you uh, had a desire, a feeling of I want to apply these precepts and these teachings and these things that might be making my life better or would seem to be able into my actual life where the drama and the strife, the stress is.
Yeah.
So you started with your union, or you thought you could do something there.
Yeah. And I always felt like, you know, being interested in spirituality, you didn't really have to do anything other than just inner work. And maybe that's true to some extent because I think there's this idea that Eckhart Tolle and other people have talked about of frequency holders, like people who are just helping the planet by virtue of the frequency they're at, an enlightened person. I think David Hawkins had said that like as long as there's like 12 enlightened people on the planet, it basically keeps the Earth from or humanity from destroying itself on the Earth. That there's enough compassion and you know joy and everything, then it kind of keeps things intact. Otherwise, it would all just start to fragment. And so I always just thought, well, all you have to do is work on yourself, and I think that's true to some extent. But I guess with the events of the last 4 years or so, I started to feel like, well, obviously there's a lot happening that can really impede a person's spiritual growth. You know, a lot of it too is just there's kind of this balance that I've noticed with people who are interested in spirituality is they have to be unhappy enough to want to question things, but happy enough to not be overwhelmed by their problems. And I feel like the events that were happening during COVID and even during like the Trump era and everything, and even during the Biden era too, it's just I think people are starting to feel overwhelmed by the pressure that the pandemic put on them, the huge transfer of wealth that happened, just the devaluation of people's income and everything. I started to think that actually it would it would be spiritual for me to take action and then try to do it from a place of being centered and not falling into unconsciousness, getting angry, getting, you know, too caught up in the world, but seeing it as a way to just try to act in a more loving way. Because I think at the end of our lives, like I think that's the thing that we'll care most about. Like, were we a loving person? Could we have done more to try to make whatever this world is, whether it's a dream or real or whatever, just to make it more positive for everyone? And I started to think, well, that's going to be what I care about. Like, could I have done something? And so I don't know. I just started to feel like my calling was more in the world of activity versus the world of, I'll say, like consciousness, just that, focusing on just my state of consciousness. I started to think I wanted to get involved in things and try to help, make the world a more positive place. And some of that has been actually in a weird way. I felt like I was usually in conflict more with the union than I was with the company when I was involved in a labor dispute over the last couple of years because I try to apply ideas from books like
Yeah.
David Hawkins' Power versus Force. Sorry, you were saying something.
Oh, I go ahead. It's fine.
Well, one of the things I saw as an opportunity for us as union members was to go from feeling powerless in our work and just in our lives. Like we always feel like we're kind of the victim of, the company we work for or some outside force, and that's why we're in the
You know
state.
that old song, I owe my soul to the company store. I was born one morning when that's right back to those union organizing days.
Yeah,
The minute it seems like from the minute I got born, my soul has been owned by the people who own the company and for whom I depend seemingly
yeah,
on what I have in life, which of course goes back to the spiritual principle of keep reminding ourselves the source is not any particular person, place, or thing, or even aspect of our own nature, but something greater. And to keep that becomes a sort of mindfulness meditation every time we get pulled, out there, pulled in here, whatever the drama, to, oh, wait, Wait, take a breath. So understandable that you might feel more conflict with those who are closer to you, perhaps in proximity, and with whom you are uh, having the discussions or debates or arguments or strategizing or something, than those who might be the corporate entities or something that may seem more removed. Or does that strike a bell or not?
Yeah, you sort of come to expect a certain type of behavior from your quote unquote adversary. You know that they're going to act in a way that's just purely out of self-interest and is in a lot of ways opposed to your interests. So there's no
Okay.
surprise there.
Yeah.
What was sometimes surprising was when people who you are working with would sometimes work against you. And so it was just trying to get everyone on the same page. That's the big struggle for unions is how do you get people from a lot of different walks of life, different worldviews, different politics, all of that to unite for a shared purpose. Like the guy who organized Amazon's union, Christian Smalls, was really great at that because he got Democrats and Trump supporters and everyone just to come together, and like he really united people despite a lot of differences that would normally, I think, people could prey on those and sort of do a divide and conquer strategy and just get everyone bickering with each other over
Mm.
politics or
Mhm. Yeah.
strategy sort of thing. So when I
Wanting real consensus, intending it, is the person who has that mindset or that spiritual value, however they come into that, is a very powerful force. And then whatever there might be within each person with whom you want consensus, there is a longing within each person for non-conflict, for peace, for belonging, for whatever, rather than division and belonging to little cohorts that are against other little cohorts. So that becomes, I think, a factor in allowing that consciousness to find itself in some form, which would be whatever you agree on and
Yeah,
to together. You would see the makings of that, starting with the intention, and not from necessarily an ego position. It's my job to, or I'll be great if I can get all of these people to, which is, you know, but rather a sense there must be real live consensus available to us here. I wonder what that would consist of, because it would speak to everyone's heart. And that's where real strength and real power. We see that in movements throughout history and throughout the world. Try to remember which country. I remember crying as I was watching. They did it through singing, through community building, through singing as a nation. And as a singer, I just, I was weeping to see how politically it was brought together, and remembering times as I was growing up with Pete Seeger and, in the 60s movements, and how people sang together. And I became part of that. So consensus building in a union, same kind of thing. Depends upon the motivation, the degree of love, the kind of love that might be available to the leadership, or even those who are not ostensibly leading, but might be leading within the group because they're more evolved.
yeah, absolutely. And
You would be
fun to
one of those persons, I suspect.
well, I went through a transformation during that whole period, just like everyone else did. And I think to me that was the most interesting part of it was seeing kind of what I was alluding to earlier about like people who felt powerless suddenly standing up for themselves. And sometimes it was out of fear. And then, sometimes people would get angry and, sometimes there would be a feeling of a kind of arrogance where you're sort of like disparaging the company, just, kind of mocking them and everything. And I just saw us go through all of these different stages. And it was interesting because as I was kind of seeing some things starting to change in people, I remember that I had this book that someone recommended to me called Power versus Force by
Yes.
David Higgins, which,
I haven't read it, but I have a number of friends who have.
yeah, I guess it's
Yeah,
one of those books that's kind of like The Power of Now, or,
yes.
just A New Earth, where it's just kind of well known in spiritual circles. But I had not read it. It just had been sitting on my bookshelf for a decade. And I pulled it out and started reading it, and it just blew me away. I was just like, this is so relevant to what I'm going through right now and what all of us are doing, which is, he talks about the emotional scale, like the scale of emotions that you can experience as a human being, from the lowest level, which would be just powerlessness. It's sort of life denying, which he says is shame is the lowest emotion.
To my little oi to joystick.
Nice. I
That's
used,
exactly what I use this to teach with. That's what this is. This is an emotional scale.
yeah, I had both the stick. I think my sister had one of those sticks, and then the little, I don't know what they are. You put them on the tips of your fingers and the
Oh,
seconds.
uh-huh.
But yeah, that it's it's a way of looking at the path from powerlessness to what he calls imperturbability, which you could just think of as like absolute empowerment. So basically, the levels of emotion go in this order: it's shame, then guilt, then apathy, fear, or I'm sorry, apathy, grief, fear, desire, anger, pride, which he says is the highest of the emotions associated with force. And I'll get to what that is in just a moment. And then courage, which he says is the first emotion associated with power. Then neutrality, willingness,
Hope,
and
hope is often seen as that first movement.
I think that courage and hope, because he basically says there's a lot of emotions that you could call it other things. Hope, I think,
Oh, many names.
yeah.
Yes.
And so acceptance and then reason. And he says reason is essentially the highest level that most people will ever attain in this world, because it it's kind of the sort of dividing line between the intellect and then transcending the intellect, and then you're starting to move into more like enlightenment, like pure compassion, almost like the chakras. It's like you're then moving into the heart level, and it's the dividing line between reason, and then the next level is love. And once you reach the level of love, and there are people throughout history who've achieved this level, people like Carl Jung, um, you know even though I think some people went even higher, like Gandhi. But once you reach that level, then that's a real turning point, in the same way that going from pride to courage is a real turning point in people's lives, because at that point, then you're moving with the energies of life versus fighting them and trying to, justify what you're doing. And then from there, love, and then joy, which has to do with healing, peace, which is really when you're starting to transcend self, and there's that feeling of just overwhelming joy, of positive attitude, and seeing everything in terms of being positive in some way, recontextualizing things. And then enlightenment is the highest level of human experience. Beyond that, you're talking, different realms. But the people who calibrate, and this goes from 0 to 1,000. 1,000 is like Christ, Buddha, Krishna. It's the avatar level of consciousness. And so when I was looking at this, I was thinking, well, were there a lot of people who are apathetic in the labor dispute in the beginning? Maybe some people at the level of fear because, they were worried about inflation, losing their jobs, and that sort of thing. But then we started moving up to like anger, and then to pride, and then when we went on strike, that was when we moved to the level of courage. And the reason why I thought this was significant is that the whole point of that book is what accounts for greater strength. And Hawkins basically says it's qualities of the mind. It's why someone like Gandhi could overcome the British Empire, because it was the power, it was the force, it was purely the power of his mind. Even though he had less wealth, less resources, less physical strength, among his followers, they still won out in the end because of the power, because they were at a higher level. Because the British Empire, the highest they could ever go was pride. They never reached the level of courage, because courage would also be the courage to admit your own shortcomings, your own flaws, what you're doing. It's like you're sort of then
Well,
self.
it's the ability to allow yourself the experience of vulnerability. And that might touch close to fear. Something, if I may just add to the conversation, it's an interesting way, useful way to look at human behavior that could encompass all the different names we have for all the different emotional experiences. And it's good to be able to name them in order not to give over to allowing yourself to think you are that emotion, but rather that you are not that emotion. It's an experience you are having as a conscious being, as a sentient being. But that is that as human animals, when we study the nature of fear and the way that the brain is designed and the human being is designed to survive, is to have three basic modes, which I'm sure this is a review, you know about this, of fear. Fear presents itself, either real or imagined danger. And the human animal has the ability to imagine what is not actually there, whereas other animals aren't troubled by that. So there are three reactions to the experience of fear, or four, but three knee-jerk. One is everything freezes, your breathing freezes, and you prepare, you're going to attack. And there's all kinds of ways, experiences of emotions, and we could name being in an aggressive attack mode, and that is to push the danger away. So when our heart realizes that, we can understand our fellow human beings who are being aggressive, terrorizing, etc., as literally terrified,
Right.
trying to kill the danger they perceive, real or imagined. The next, of course, is to flee, to get out of there, to run away. Yikes, I'm out of here. And that could also be, well, I want to go into the third, freezing, because I see apathy and numbing and self-soothing, like a lot of addictive behaviors. They are meant to calm and to make those scary feelings subside, but it's temporary only. It's only a fix because you haven't gone to the root or the heart of what is frightening you. And there's where the courage, the intention, the surrender potential comes in, to allow yourself to go into and embrace what is terrifying, so that you then are empowered to use your reason, your instinct, your intuition is available to you. You're now empowered to be able to know whether you are in danger, what you thought the danger was, to have choices now
Yeah.
for action that you never had before when you were taken over by fear and maybe didn't even know that's what was going on with you because you were too scared to register that you were scared.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's the unconsciousness, like the fear is kind of pulling you down so that you don't really, I mean, you don't have the energy to really look at things. That's why I think the fearful people tend to gravitate towards strong leaders, sometimes very charismatic people. It's because the energy is not there for them
But
to.
it takes more energy. The energy, the reason they don't is because it's being used to suppress what your nature natively wants you to know. So the
Definitely.
irony is that, yeah, that when you surrender, which is not, okay, I give up, it's, okay, I'm going to die into what has been, I don't know what's going to happen, but it's got to be It's got to be more freeing than what I've been sticking myself with. And then all of a sudden the energy for the movement, for the journey is there.
Yeah, you make a good point, and Hawkins makes this point too in the book that there's a difference between acceptance and apathy. Apathy is a very low level of consciousness. Acceptance is actually a pretty high level. Most people experience it once in a while, but it's kind of rare. But the way he describes it is basically you're accepting life on life's own terms. And the image that comes to mind to me is like if you had like a pipe burst in your house, apathy would be to just do nothing about it. Acceptance would be to say, yes, this happened, I'm going to fix it now, but not falling into despair, like why did this happen to me, or this always happens to me, and getting angry. It's just accepting that it happened and then doing something to fix it. That's
And doing something doesn't always follow acceptance immediately. It's important for people to know that. It's a moment of registering and not struggling or resisting, but accepting your experience. And even, you know, in a more conscious or skilled way, to accept. It's like an awareness of your awareness that you're accepting this is where you're at. You're being with it. Maybe you're studying it. Some part of you is studying this experience you're having, but you're accepting it. And no movement towards action has come to you yet. And when you get good at that conscious, at that state, then the inspiration will lead the action. It will feel right to you in your bones.
yeah, yeah, definitely. And sometimes it's weird how you can kind of move in one direction. Like sometimes you get really frustrated, there's a lot of resistance, and then you eventually just exhaust yourself, and then there's no more energy to resist, and then you accept. And so
Yes.
it's like you're going, it's like those old video games where you go to one side of the screen and then come out on the other. And then suddenly, that's how I usually do it. I normally don't accept things right away. I will usually let my thoughts grind against it, and then I will exhaust myself, and then I'll accept it. As you can
And
hear,
it's called scrutiny. That can be a beautiful thing.
yeah.
Rather than I had a teaching many years ago. I used to make a lot of art, and I made a little creativity doll. And it was a class I was teaching on creative block. And I discovered that I never had creative block. I had creative diarrhea. It's like the channel for me that is creative is constantly open. And it's rather for me not to be overwhelmed by the constant ongoing ideas for things that I could create or make or discover or follow or, you know, whatever. But this little doll um, came through and I forgot what, remind me of where we were going. I just lost my train of
Oh, we're
thought.
talking about when you exhaust yourself and to the point of acceptance, and
Oh,
then you're talking about scrutinizing.
and then let go.
Yeah,
Um, well, but the thought is gone, whatever it was. Um,
it'll come back.
it probably will when we're talking about something else off the topic.
Or at 4 in the morning when you're
Yeah, exactly. When it comes back. But yes, that having to exhaust the struggle and then I release and I let go. There's a song, I release, I let go, I let spirit run my life, which is kind of the opposite extreme. Like I'm just, you know, here as a vessel and or whatever, which can be a wonderful path. It's never been mine. um, but some balance between the listening, the gleaning, the learning, the assessing, and then the movement, you know, Shiva Shakti, the stillness. That's what I call the Tao of play, the dance between the stillness and the activity in life until that becomes more seamless, becomes a way of life. And something to practice every day, all day long.
Yeah. I think you're getting to the whole point of like whether you're moving with life or you're moving against it. And I think there's certain things that are just they're self-evident. Like, you know, when you accept it, like radical acceptance is kind of this idea in spirituality that's become really popular. Just the idea that everything is as it is because it is, and it can't be any other way. And so when you're resisting something, you're Byron Katie talks about like arguing with reality and that being the definition of insanity. So I think this was the whole insight for me when I was in the labor dispute. Is I was like, this is no different than dealing with bad weather. You know, you can't change it, but it's just something to be reckoned with. Anything that happens in life, it's not to be taken personally. It's not personal that a company would try to, exploit their employees, or they, would try to get as much out of them and give back as little as possible. Like that's not personal. They're doing what the ego is designed to do, which is just act out of pure self-interest. And on some level, this is what got me in hot water with people in the union. Is I was making the observation that on some level we could be thankful for what they're doing, because look at all the people who were previously passive and apathetic and unwilling to stand up for themselves in life, and now look where we're at now. All
Mhm,
of these people are actively involved, and some of them have become leaders within the union, and
mhm.
and now they have the courage to go on strike, which none of us had ever done before. No one in our union's history, in 80 years had ever gone on a strike. So I saw it as this really beautiful transformative change where it's like the two sides kind of brought each other into balance. The company was acting out of pure self-interest, and we had maybe been too much of a doormat and didn't stand up for ourselves. And it's like as we became more self-interested because we weren't self-interested, and
Yes.
we brought the company into balance and they were less self-interested. Or
Beautifully said, because that is the balance, is that there is, thinking about what would the archetype be here of the, I don't know, the warrior, the king. I'm trying to find what would be an archetype. Um, Maybe the warrior for one's interests. When there is a mature, the fullness of that archetype is available to inhabit, then we bring whatever the empowering elements that are available to that expression of humankind. When it's out of balance, it has too much or too little of that potential fullness. It under identifies or over identifies, and it's out of balance. So you've just described the process of working, if it were with an archetype, to be more centered when you consider, or you voice dialogue, which is something that I very much would like us to do a little introductory video. You see how listening to these different sides of the inner drama or dialogue allows you as a being to inhabit an awareness we call the aware ego, which is the one that acts in the physical world with conscious choice, because you can hear what may be a benefit or not of benefit, and you don't identify with this voice or that voice. You know they are parts of you, and you can feel the energy that you're trying to access and act thereon. So you just gave an example of a whole way of teaching that I've been doing since 1990 that I love.
yeah, no, I mean these are universal ideas. I'm sure a lot of people
Yes.
just come across them in one area or another. I mean, I came across it by reading. Some people come across it through their own experience in life and their own observations. So this is why it's one of those things where it's like there are things that are self-evident, and then there are things that have to be justified. And I think generosity is it's self-evident that that's preferable to greed, and its truth is preferable and it's self-evident that it's preferable to deception. You know, the things they're just obvious. They never have to be
Well,
justified.
they're not, we can think of a lot of people in just our country alone to whom it's not self-evident either one of those, because their ability to register what is in the heart in the deepest layers is not currently available to them consciously.
Yeah,
And they're in fear. So whatever they assume they have to be or do to feel safe is running their lives.
yep, I agree.
And generosity or greed or whatever is not seen as we would call it that, but something of a necessity for their survival, and that therefore they have to convince themselves they're entitled. And we are in, there is underneath that, of course, a wellspring that in each being we are entitled to be well. But it isn't meant to have to be at the expense of harming other life forms.
Yeah, true power doesn't take power away from anyone. It gives power to other people. That's why I think like when you have a very strong leader, that's someone who empowers other people to be leaders too. So yeah, I always kind of thought that idea of power being just, you know, like crushing someone lawyer style or whatever is just a very kind of warped view of what power is. Whereas, you know, power, I just tend to think of it as like Batman and Robin, you know, like when Batman is not there, Robin can do all the things Batman can do because Batman has empowered him to be as powerful as he is. It's just that Batman is maybe just more experienced at it. But I don't actually read a lot of comic books, but I always just thought that seemed like the perfect model of like someone who has empowered someone else to be a leader, so they can handle things when the primary leader is absent.
Mhm. You know the word apprentice.
Yes.
I just I attended an event by a gentleman scholar who I admire, who's been a mentor of mine in the past and is an elder. And I enjoy that I now feel myself to be one. So I resonate with what he says and appreciate it, but it isn't so much that I go in to be taught by him anymore.
Yeah.
His lessons are my own, and I've been teaching them myself for a long time. But I was drawn, you know, whatever the universe drew me to attend this event, and found myself not listening particularly to him, but joining in the very active chat, which was international and which I figured would be there. And he attracts beautiful people. So I was engaging, and there was a particular person, a woman, who was very actively counseling people who were writing in their questions or their comments that weren't going to the presenter who was doing his thing.
Yeah.
And you know, in my book Coincidence, maybe we'll get around to that at some point. Um, you learn to pay attention to cues, even if you don't know where they might lead or what they're about. You know that there's a signal of some kind. So I have never tried to contact anyone in a chat room, although the entrepreneur in me, and I now and then can see them in other people that have shown up. Maybe I can, you know, I can find some business in here, you know, some way to leave my information. So this particular woman um, had her email address because she was talking to some gal who was having a lot of issues, and just left and said, you know, I'm going to just send a little email to both of these women, and I don't know if either of them will write back, and I don't really know what's there, but I'm feeling drawn to it. So long story short, one of the two women has now become a new client of mine, student, if you will, and has expressed the desire to apprentice with me. And I've only had one other person ever actually apprentice for 3 years. He was in Denmark and didn't call it that initially, but it was clear that's what was happening. And he is a teacher in his own right, as are you. And in however you may be teaching by example or whatever, you are definitely a teacher. So the idea was playing through my mind, it might be fun to have a podcast or show that is The Apprentice, but it's the spiritual apprentice, or it's
Yeah.
the awakening apprentice or something, because we are all apprenticing and we are all teachers when we are just open in this dance of life. There are those who need to learn something or hear something from us or watch something we're doing, and then we're finding others. And it's not, to me, a coincidence at all. It's part of some great mysterious organizing principle that we're all cells in some great body learning how to do our part in the whole so that it is divinely unimpeded from maybe just being the heart of love, whatever the, concept. I'm definitely here on a second ray of love and wisdom as a being. And
Yeah.
remember years ago studying theosophy, it seems like my worldly ways was fourth ray of harmony through chaos. Boy, has that been a lifestyle of mine, learning harmony through chaos. It works. You
Yeah. I
gave an
mean,
example of your own recently. We have to be beat up sometimes before we're available to grow.
yeah, Eckhart Tolle always said that the thing that makes a person willing to change is being shocked. That's the only way to awaken someone typically. So, as someone who's unwilling, the only way to make them willing is to shock them out of their unconsciousness. So I think sometimes that is the value of a bully or the value of, some really disruptive event in your life is it sort of jars you out of your narcolepsy and then you make changes.
One of the very popular teachers, Abraham Hicks, who introduced the idea of contrast in the 80s as being both part of the reality of our lives, that there is that which we're drawn to or repelled by, and the contrast is inevitable continually so that we can register what it is we really do want and need. So bless it all.
Yeah,
Fret about it. It's helpful. And when it's really, really terrifying and cruel and just an abomination, to be able to find our heart and register the terror unconsciously, mostly, with which those who are perpetrating are acting. And there's where the practice of Tonglen or loving kindness meditations come in, to be able to find that place in us, which is the vast heart to bring. And there, but for the grace of God go I, to honor the whole of our experience while we gravitate towards what feels uplifting and inspiring and enlivening, and move away from what isn't, but not so much struggling and resisting.
yeah. It reminds me too of the whole idea of forgive them, they know not what they do, that sin is unconsciousness.
Absolutely.
And I forget if I was talking to you about this when we first spoke, but I was talking to a lot of people about astrology and how, the difference between the age of Pisces, which we're moving out of, and going into the age of Aquarius is that Pisces has to do with duality and Aquarius has to do with the reconciliation of opposites. And I thought obviously there's space and time are now seen as relative, but then a lot of people see good and evil as being in some sense relative rather than absolute. And just from
Or
having,
Mobius strip. They're good and they're a human perception or
yeah,
register, but they're in an energetic loop.
Yeah, and you could describe that Mobius strip as almost just like it's like a measurement of one thing. It's just one thing. One thing is consciousness. When there's a low degree of consciousness, it appears to be evil. When there's a high degree of consciousness, it appears to be good and holy. And so you're really just talking about one thing, but we see them as like two opposites that are absolute, and
Yes,
that's changing though. And I think that's a
yes,
sign of the times we're living in.
it is.
So I find that
Mm.
another way of looking at, things that happen in our daily lives with a little bit more compassion and empathy is just that people are doing the best they can, and if they could do better, they would. A person who's unconscious doesn't know they're unconscious. So they're in a sense a victim, and
Yes.
it takes a victim to make one. I mean, these are all like platitudes that people have heard, but
And they're
they're,
true.
yeah,
And they came out of, or when, the difference between saying it as a platitude, but not embodying it at the moment. Maybe you've embodied it some other time, so you're saying it now, you're reciting it. You're not actually inhabiting the experience of it. But we can either inhabit and then the languaging comes to us, or we can read something, hear something, and then it takes possession in a beautiful way. It becomes part of our awareness now of something that we want to be living.
yeah,
And this great contrast that is happening now and the divide that is evident is a warring against the light, perhaps, but light and dark. I remember so many years ago taking up the baton for the dark because there was a dark goddess image that I was working with, and I identified with um, the feminine yin as opposed to the masculine yang, which was considered light. I mean, there's lots of ways that different cultures and times and thinkers have contexted a duality rather than allowing us to experience what might that be within my being, within the great all that might be. How do I to try to grok that within the confines or limitations of form? How do I transcend my form?
yeah, yeah. I mean, 'cause ultimately that's the whole point of spirituality is to kind of move beyond duality, to sort of see things as they truly are, I guess, in the absolute sense, which is everything being, undifferentiated wholeness. But this is where then I have to say, well, I actually don't understand this beyond as a, an intellectual kind of understanding. And so I don't know if I have any particular insight to share about that other than, it seems like, I don't know if you look at the world in terms of form, it just everything seems like a tragedy. I mean, everything is destroyed. There's just never ending. Even just driving, like to, I live in Madison and Milwaukee is about an hour and a half away. I drove to Milwaukee and I came home and there were like 1,000 bugs on my car that I just destroyed, like just driving, there's just nothing
Ah,
but death. And so you think about nature, and you're
yes,
like,
yes,
there doesn't
yes.
seem to be much concern about the life of the individual, but life as a whole, there seems to be a concern in nature that life continues. And I keep thinking, well, there's this compassion for the whole, but not for the individual. The form, there's almost no regard. Like it'll be destroyed. There'll be something new that's birthed. And so I keep thinking wholeness seems to be the thing that
Mm.
is the utmost importance, not the individual, not the form. Because
I
otherwise
would
it's
enjoy trying to go into some channeling here because it's awaiting
that'd be great.
about this thing, that this beautiful thing. So and the way that I do that, I'm in it right now, is that I take what is here and describe and be with it, and it leads and leads and then comes to a teaching, or hopefully for each of us, something that feels subtle and expands and deepens us. So I want to share my appreciation of your ability, the sensitivity of you, the instrument that you have elected to be in this life with, that you're sensitive to the harm being done, the killing, any pain or extinguishing of life forms that are innocent, seemingly, that you in your big driving machine. So what I was picking up was that each of those little consciousnesses have some direction in their own scheme of things, to have met with you in this way. So they want to say, don't get so full of yourself, my friend. We too have power of choice, even though we're not in a human kind of mind, we also are emanations of the divine spark of capability. So we have come together, all of us, with you, just for that possible moment of quickening, of awareness. And for those of us who do not wish to do harm, for whom the awareness of doing harm to another hurts us, to be glad we have that capability, and at the same time, wait a minute, what if I'm not the only power here? It soothes it opens something greater. What if life is even more marvelous in some way? MARVEL-US. I spell marvelous. So that from this moment of that other life forms also have some divine capability of choosing. And that from this death-defying, so if those life forms return or do not return to this plane in some way, you have a moment of opening for what's next for you. Maybe it's just a reclaiming of your desire to gift with life, however you can, with a sense of maybe the mystery that our minds can't unfold, that it should be so. You're driving and all of this is happening, and that Marcia's channeling these little creatures are saying, hey, wait a minute. And the reason that that was possible is that a beloved spirit companion of mine who is in doggy form, 2 incarnations of doggy forms in this life with me, a dog, died in the very way that I tried to prevent through 6 cases of bloat and driving to the vet and being told I should euthanize her because she was suffering, and I could not bring myself to be the one to say, take her life. It was a very, very messy ending, and it still pains me sometimes. But when she had passed over, and I was one day praying, and I was asking the question, why? When I tried so hard to prevent and keep you here alive and well, would you die in this hideous way? And the voice said very clearly, because it was never your choice how I go. I said, well, oh my gosh, And furthermore, the voice of this being said to me, It's time you learn how to love unconditionally your fellow humans. It was time for me to let this go. It was beautiful. We love each other so much. I needed to go. And this was a good way to do it. And that's why, to me, the ability to not to let ourselves not know, but be curious, beginner's mind, to open up and trust that whatever even the question isn't clear at times. The question will become clear through the answer, which it's connected to as part of that infinity of sort of a perfection of something. It's always waiting. So what might you take away if it wasn't just your fault or just an accident, if there was some kind of benefit possibly to this encounter that touched you and moved you and made you sad, uncomfortable?
Well, as you were talking, I was thinking about this idea that every death is a suicide. Like every being chooses when their time here is done, and then they decide to go back, whether it's your dog or whether it's us or the, you know, infinitude of insects that I've probably just, destroyed while driving regularly. We're all choosing when to go, and so it's not an accident, and it's obviously, to I guess to someone who has seen just that there's something beyond this dimension, that there's a dimension in the background where nothing changes. I think some of us have kind of experienced that at different times in our lives as we're on our spiritual journey. Sometimes you sort of sink back into it, and and you feel it. Sometimes you have an out of body experience or whatever. I just think there's something that indicates that our consciousness is not tied to our bodies. So it's
Yes.
kind of obvious, even to a scientist who would say the body you have now is not the one you had obviously when
Mm,
you were born, but even a couple of years ago. So the body is not the thing that has a sense of continuity. It's something else. It's not your thoughts, because the thoughts you have today are not the same ones you had yesterday. It's something else. And it's your consciousness, but it has no form. So and I think that's why it
yeah,
has
it's
continuity.
formless dimension.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to mention, so I don't forget, that when you were describing the idea, the sense that every death is a suicide, is a self, that there is something larger that's attending it that we need not fret about or fear. That because if I've had that experience you describe where some bug comes flying into the thing and I'm aware of it splattering and a life lost. And what is available is bless you. It's a registering that I took part in something, and to allow a sense of responsibility in the moment. So I'm not going to beat myself up or say, damn bug, you left a, blob on my windshield, or, all those different things that humans could do about it. But even because there is right now climate change, I don't know, our insects are not becoming extinct. There's a huge loss of insects that are being reported. And certainly a loss of bees. Uh, some places are reporting there's hardly any ducks or geese. There's stuff is going on. So when something causes us to be alert, we can offer, even though we're not controlling it all, we can offer a blessing. Bless you. Bless us. May this be a moment of more consciousness for me, more love available, maybe today, maybe more compassion today, because this happened. And then I think we're using the experience well.
Yeah, and to take this full circle back to where we started, I think that's the whole point is it's just how you frame things, how you look at it changes your experience completely. And that was I think that the transformation I went through over the last few years is just how I started to see things became different. And I think, whether you're looking at, the inevitability of death, which I think everyone was confronted with during the pandemic, just this idea that if not you, then maybe someone you're close to could die. I think there had to be something to ground people to be able to get through that. And this is why I think, the things that you were talking about, just having the spiritual dimension in your life allows you to look at things in a way where you don't see them as being inherently negative. I mean, a person can make anything negative, but they can make anything positive too. And maybe from the insect's perspective, I can't speak for them, but maybe you released them. I mean, I've heard this idea that life is more like death than death is. So really, when you see the
Mm.
unending decay and death in life, it might be a mercy. I don't know. I mean, when I hear people say, well, it's better than the alternative, when they're talking about something really bad happening, I'm like, and a lot of times I hear very religious people use that phrase, and I'm like, are you saying that this is better than whatever you think happens after death, like heaven and just an eternity of joy or whatever? I don't know if that's actually what happens, but I think like, well, you believe that, and you still think that the alternative is worse. I don't know. To me,
But but probably we should probably wind up or whatever. Um, this idea of be, I'm sorry, I was just I went down to my desk and all of a sudden, what was the last point you just made?
the idea that,
Idea of whatever happens afterwards.
yeah,
Um, when I have had the opportunity a number of times to be in the presence of someone or an animal, someone near the threshold. Uh, what I have had the grace to experience, and then I form my own knowing around it, my own narrative, my own understanding, is that all of those opportunities that I had, and several were with animals, and then people's loved ones that were departing. And when I was singing and I had been given the assignment to go into the subacute ward rooms of some people who were getting ready to die, and experience the being, the consciousness that the body was associated with, that was emanating from that, but the body is not the being. All there was light. And the light to me was pure love, unadulterated. So when after this had happened with my friend Crystal, who was teaching me from the other side, and I didn't know that I was able to tune into other people's animals until a friend whose dog was getting ready to die and knew that Crystal had died a month or so before. She called me crying, says, Marcia, I don't know if you can help me, but Nico was her dog. Nico is, and I don't know what to do. And I'm afraid that he's suffering. And I don't, what I felt happen was consciousness that I knew as Crystal, my beloved dog. That being was like a guardian angel that had taken a doggy form and now was free of that doggy form, blended and gave me the opportunity to tune in to Nico. I could feel the dog and the pain. And what was given to me to report to my friend was Nico is not suffering. Like Crystal said to me, you are, because you're resisting. I'm in pain, and it hurts, but I'm not suffering. You are. And my beloved human friend, I love you so much. I wish you didn't have to suffer because of my pain. But it's just an incredible experience, and I've had that a number of times. Don't know what will happen when it's my time or people who are very close to me. It's like it's a whole mess of human emotions, but I've had the grace of experiencing that. And I also sense that there are many souls who pass, well, because in past life readings, you all the time see that we can die through a trauma. And the essence of something is not resolved. So it's part of the being who may carry that then in what we call karma into another incarnation, because something about love is wanting to resolve, something we're believing. There's an urging inside not to have to, but we're going to live out something that's going to provide the conditions there that being shot again or whipped again or beat into surrender. And then the very mistake in the belief can lift up. And we're free to have a different experience and then form a different frame. Or be framed ourselves differently.
Yeah.
So that we're in life in a much more full, trusting and capability.
It's a very powerful tool, and I don't know, I don't think it gets the credit that it deserves. That there's just this ability to see things however it is that you want to, and I just think it's a very subtle thing, but I think if we saw the real significance of it, we would give it a lot more importance in our lives. So yeah, and yeah, what you're talking about was like psychological suffering versus physical suffering. I mean, that's
Physical
something I
pain.
think
Yeah.
if you could deal with the psychological suffering, I feel like the physical suffering would not be a problem.
Yeah. The distinction there was to use the words differently, like using reactivity and response. And you can say, well, the same thing. And yet, for me, it's always been a great benefit to use those words differently so that reaction becomes knee-jerk, from some primal, programming of the brain and the system, to response ability, the ability to take something and to respond to it, to dance with it in a more conscious way. And
Yeah,
that's useful for me. So
yeah. So I feel like we covered a lot of really interesting stuff in this
we
first
certainly can.
conversation. Yeah,
Why don't we talk just a little bit? And I think it's lovely. I saw the children kind of moving through, but they gave us the opportunity and if they had come in, it needs to be able to be part of what's happening. I've here and there been in a channeling, which is a state that is altered somewhat from normal waking consciousness, but I've done it for a long time, so I tend to be able to hang there. But that's one challenge I could have. If kids came running into the room, I probably would, I could come back into it.
yeah,
Um, this is a question, since we're just kind of figuring out or finding a way. I'm incredibly appreciative of the kind of um, conversation that you are capable of. The level of spiritual development that you actually possess and your ability to articulate. And I had no way of knowing that would be true. So I'm delighted that that's the case. As someone who uh, would be potentially, well, there's either bartering with you, there has to be some, you have to figure out what would that be. If I'm paying you for something, as much as I appreciate I tend to say who the other teachers are as well, if it's Eckhart Tolle. But when I'm doing something that I would be paying to promote my own work, it wouldn't be to be going on and promoting the work
Oh,
of
yeah.
all these other mentors. It doesn't work. So, uh, so the books and other teachers. So if what would work is you could say, well, I learned this from so and so, and what do you think about? And give me an opportunity to be, to wax prophetic on it, or to be. But I'm trying to be an expert in my own right with
Yeah.
help. And I have a lot of great teachings and so forth. And that still is plenty of room for you to question or ask questions. You say, well, how does that match up? Or do you agree with, so and so, or I learned that. But that's one comment. So you want to, feed me back on that.
No, for sure. I mean, I figured we'll figure out like the best way to present a lot of this stuff. And yeah, I mean, I was actually thinking even before you mentioned that, I was like, I should probably read one of your books and then we could talk about that, it just would make it easier because then I
Absolutely.
so
Absolutely.
so yeah, no, I'm definitely on the same page about that. I just as things come to me, but even then I generally try not to even talk about other people's teachings. I didn't even realize when we were going to do this that we were potentially going to try to record something that might be usable. So I did
I
not
think there
prepare.
are some snippets in there that are.
Yeah.
Uh, I'm trying to, maybe if you listen back or if you send it to me, there would be little places. So do you have cloud, cloud recording is disabled for me now. I'm not paying extra for it. I could conceivably do that, but that wouldn't help you for your editing. It would only be on my end. And the reason I just disabled it was it took so much time. I was having so much trouble, and back then I was getting noise, which I'm not getting anymore. I was getting ticking, clicking sounds and things because
Oh
some
yeah.
the audio was, it was awful. So the recordings are useless. So I
Yeah.
need to know that we could say, oh, that was a good segment. There's 3 or 4 minutes of something. The channeled thing, when I picked up the little wand when we were talking, that's
Hmm.
potentially something that everybody could relate to. So those would be ideas. Can you edit little separate segments from your
Oh yeah.
end? How do you do that? What equipment do you use to do that?
I'm pretty basic with this. There's some video editing software that just comes with Windows that I use for Sophia's show. So
Great.
I just edit it with that, and there's ways of making graphics and things through PowerPoint. You can turn that into a video and then add music to it. So if you wanted like a little bumper at the beginning, kind of like
Absolutely.
so, but we can talk more
Absolutely.
about that. I was actually going to say if we want to do shows regularly, if we do them on the weekend, we'll have no issues with, my daughter might be here, but like no work issues, no me making sure I'm not
Better
late.
for me too. Weekends are far freer
Oh, good.
than
Well,
during the week. So it's a deal.
it was meant
And
to be.
again, I got a really great idea. I think that the exchange between us is really lovely.
Yeah, I agree. I even got a moment where it happened twice, actually. It happened when you were channeling, obviously, but it happened before that where I just felt like a kind of energy, like wave kind of passed through me. I don't know. I just felt like I started to pick up on something. And I don't experience that with very many people, but one of them was my spiritual mentor, who was someone who
Mm.
I felt like was a really kind of perceptive and just I felt like a very high energy person. Um, I started to feel that from you when you were talking, and so it kind of I don't know, it's really hard to describe what exactly happens when I feel that, but it just sort of
Yes.
it brings me into awareness of something in the background. That's the only way I can describe it. Is there's like it's like an atmospheric quality, where I'm just like there's just this other dimension that I'm usually not
Yes,
aware of, and then it suddenly becomes part of the
absolutely.
yeah
Whatever that is, because I have that experience, and I think like you too, I have it when there's a connection going on,
yeah
and then there's something in the background, there's something greater that's happening. And we may not be able to shift, maybe we shift and we get some input about it, because we can do that too. But, while we do these together, if, for instance, because I love the idea of some interactive thing. I think what just happened today was wonderful. If
yeah
you, for instance, if I can help you channel or be aware that you are, or because we're always, if we're doing this, we need to imagine an audience.
yeah
They're learning along with us. Maybe it would be interesting for, either one of us, for the audience, or if someone, uh, how does channeling happen? What is it? Or
yeah
how do I understand what I'm doing? How might you understand what you're doing? But when somebody's listening, how do you know when you're having it? You're tuning in. There's lots of channels. So I could explain how I like to say it's like a TV station or a radio. Sometimes you got static. Sometimes you're in between channels, or you're only focused on one channel. That's the reality you're pulling it. Go back to Carlos Castaneda. We're talking about the assemblage point, which is fascinating. We could see in the aura where reality is actually being assembled.
yeah
And if the point is near the heart, that's the reality you're assembling. But then there's a part of your being that can be detached from, not identified with the assembling. So there's a meta. So I love this. It's like you do. But bringing home all the time, how do we bring that into the union meeting, the progressive demographic meeting? I just stopped attending. I,
yeah
it's like, okay, I don't need any more high level anxiety about what's going on. I tune into politics every day.
it just makes life feel like a struggle, and that's not how
Um,
it should be.
yeah. So why don't, so well, I guess, so you answered the question. So your editing is not dependent on Zoom, which mine is and was, because I don't have anything else to do anything with. So thank goodness.
Yeah
Yeah. I have a friend in Denmark who is helped establish a healing arts school academy. And I don't know that they're doing it this year, but they did conferences, and they did it on Vimeo. And I
okay
think I looked into that, and I don't know if I've actually set up an account or what. Is that useful for anything? It's just another source of making videos.
yeah you can upload to Vimeo, to YouTube, to Rumble, to whatever. I mean, they're just
Okay.
alternative video platforms.
What should I do? Can you send me a link to an episode that you and Sophia did? I'd be curious anyway.
Yeah,
That would be great. Um, and then I can look into Rumble. Would I be the oldest Rumbler?
I mean, it's great because you don't have to worry about what you talk about. Whereas on YouTube, I can't imagine we would be talking about anything controversial, but with Sophia, that's a concern.
So here would be my example of what might be controversial. when we get into the level of sexuality, and I only talk about it from healing or from evolving.
Yeah.
But there are examples of things that are controversial or considered, maybe not. So one of them is how my Kundalini arising episode, how it kicked in, and how I realized this past summer that what my guides were actually teaching me as a form of Tonglen practice. But it came through, I was self-pleasuring. My lover was leaving, I was crying, I was grieving, I was angry because he was angry with me and he'd thrown a phone. And no boyfriend I'd ever had ever thrown something at me, past me,
Yeah.
but at me. And
Wow.
I was just a mess. And I'd had these broken, relationships before. So I was missing my lover, and I was doing some self-stimulating to relax or pacify or move energy, which is partly what sex has always been to me.
Yeah.
And I didn't necessarily ever have created a loving partner who could interact more on that energetic level, which is where the tantric training took me. That I
Yeah.
was always trying to make love with the universe.
Mm-hmm.
And the world wasn't giving me what that was. It was just making me feel like a failure somehow.
Yeah. I mean,
So while that was happening, guidance started giving me a technique and working with me. And what was happening was that the grief and the tightening and the sobbing was exchanged for ecstasy twice and bliss pouring through my body. And then I was left to what the hell just happened.
yeah.
And so in describing, that was a key experience in my life. So I don't know if doing that on YouTube, I did share some of that with, now did I do that on the coincidence? But that was always the thing, because if you don't have someone who's open to hearing it, or, if I talked about, because I had worked with a lot of male clients in LA, and a couple of famous people whose names I would not give, obviously.
Yeah.
But one of whom is a country western, well-known country western star, who was interested in tantra and sex, but very privately. Didn't
Yeah.
want anybody in his universe to know anything about it. I had a singer whose agent called me up, used a different name to start with, saying, well, we can't let anybody know, but he's got some performance anxiety thing. We wondered if you might be able to help him out. I had a business exec, very wealthy guy, who was in charge of everything in his life. And he was a wreck because he had no place he felt he could be vulnerable. So he was going to dominatrixes
Mm.
who would pee on him and all this other stuff, and he would feel out of control. And he said, I don't want to be doing this anymore.
Yeah.
Can you help me? I want to be able to talk about those experiences if they come into play because of the teaching.
Yeah.
So you think YouTube would, again, I don't know.
I watch videos about this stuff and they don't seem to get censored. So I think that
Good,
we wouldn't have any problem with that.
great.
Yeah. So I think it'd be good to talk about.
So maybe are videos able to be released on more than one platform?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Can
All right,
cross.
so I don't
In
have
fact,
to choose. Oh, okay, that's why I
yeah.
was asking, because I thought I had to pick one or another.
Yeah. It makes it easy. In fact, you should be able to. I mean, I can set this up, but where you post it on YouTube and then it also posts it on Rumble automatically, so you don't have to post
Great.
them manually in multiple places.
So I will, let me send you, I have, if you don't mind, a copy of the coincidence book which has a whole lot of different stories and many of my practices and the precepts and teachings, probably all or most of which will be familiar to you, and quoting many like Eckhart and Deepak. And if I have a color, I may have a color one. I was going to send you one that is not the final edition. I mean,
Okay.
the final edition was cleaned up a little more, but I don't think it would make any difference. You may find some typos here and there or something, but I have a
Good.
few extras of those. So let me
Great.
take down an address.
Oh yeah. Let me know when you're ready and I'll give it to you.
Sure, I'm ready.
It's 3222
Yep,
Gregory Street, just like the name,
okay.
Madison, Wisconsin,
Mm, yep,
53711.
okay. My sister went to grad school in, she had a grad school in Madison. But at the time of the protests,
Oh yeah.
in the 60s, there's a picture of her in the front. Oh, huge, massive students protesting. She was in the front line in Madison.
Oh nice. Yeah, it's a very counterculture city.
Yeah. So I will send you a copy of that, which I think is, the other stories. Many of my stories are uh, kind of a healing of the deep feminine, but I always point out that it's also a healing for the deep masculine because they are inseparable.
Yeah.
Any wounding done to one is done to the other, and any healing done to one is done to the other.
Yeah.
Whole idea of duality, that there's even, in fact, it's interesting to talk about androgyny because in my being, I know I'm androgynous.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's an interesting place.
We'll have to talk about David Bowie or something,
Yeah, yeah.
aesthetic of misogyny.
So it's great because you can pull in a level of conversation and what people are talking about that only I've started to do some commentary on political, on the videos where, yeah, it's mostly younger people. Here there'll be an old person. So when I'm in my 70s and I remember whatever, and then all that, put in something. And I think the reason I tuned it out is I thought, it's just, I don't relate to it anymore.
Yeah.
If I want to be able to be an effective teacher, I need to hear those questions again with that kind of think, oh yeah, I remember when. And oh yeah, because I'm not totally enlightened. I can relate to that kind of quandary or pain,
Yeah.
fear, exhaustion.
Yeah.
But oh, thank goodness I've made it to age 79. I'm still here. And I had a whole lot of different practices. I love them. What can I share? Or, oh, I feel a channeling coming in. There's information. Like there's already, in fact, the other day it was fascinating. This young gal who's on the East Coast as well. She's 45. And I had who would like to apprentice. She's from India and she lives here in the States now. And she leaned back on her couch to listen, and she went into a sort of a, namaste listening. And so she'd asked me a question. She wanted me to give her a past life, Akashic record. That's what
Yeah.
she'd asked me to do. And so she leaned back, and immediately I thought it was fascinating. I felt myself as an entity using this instrument. And I haven't felt that in a long time. It's more like when I'm channeling, I'm bridging. And with her there, somehow in the consciousness that we were together, I was even talking more like maybe Bashar, only
Yeah.
he's in a whole performance. And I could do that. I could
Yeah.
create a beat and people would listen to me more if I did that. I even thought about my Shakti Bubby, she's a, but it was fascinating. And that's something you mentioned about that's in the background that's happening. You can't maybe even name it. It's an awareness of your being in some way, in something very vast that you are it of it. You're not it, you're it, but you're not it, and yet you're tuning in somehow. It's going on while you're also connecting with the consciousness. I felt the God for guides, I felt the antiquity of the connection that we were bringing into present time here now. So I'll send you a book.
Yeah, that would be great. I look forward
And
to it.
what you'd want to talk about, some things that I might like to capture. Like I said, one of the things that I would love to have, and I don't know if people really listen more than 5 minutes at a time, unless you're really, if you're Eckhart Tolle or even, there are other teachers, Carolyn Mace, who I always have a sort of mixed, sometimes I appreciate her, she's brilliant, and I don't always enjoy her energy. Byron Katie was a teacher of mine many, many years ago, served a wonderful purpose. But, we need to figure out whether or not people will listen, or maybe what Bernie Beitman does, which I think other people do, is maybe take something that is a highlight that maybe I don't know, maybe there's 2 or 3 choices. You choose, I choose something.
Yeah.
But, it's maybe 2 minutes or a minute or two that's at the front of the video, if that's possible, so that we hope to capture people's attention and get them involved for
Yeah.
some longer.
It's a
But
good idea.
yeah. And if there are, little cameos, little, like you've said something that really was just wonderfully, it deserves to be a video in its own right. Um, Certainly whatever me as a so-called teacher here is doing, I'm just open to sharing that with you and finding a way, and anything that enhances my ability to reach people, that's beyond some kind of a mutual exchange here, will come up with a rate and I'll pay you for those hours, for at least a certain amount of time. I have
Sure.
money to do that with.
Yeah, no,
And it'd be
definitely.
nice if we could generate money from something. I don't know, but
That's the idea. Well, hopefully this generates money for you in terms of like book sales and clients and things. I mean, it
yeah.
hopefully will be something that opens up some doors in that regard for you.
Yes, it would be wonderful. I have many, many mantras about, source, and keep pulling myself back there, because in the physical reality of things, I did lose lose the livelihood that I have. And it has never fully, reestablished itself. So it would be very nice to be able to use what I do with my life every day, all day long anyway, and be able to have a new platform.
Yeah, and you're about to have your astrological year here in like a year and a half. That'll be a big moment for you.
Which one? 80?
As a Leo, it'll be the astrological year for Leo in 2026.
What do
Right now
you
it's for
want?
Gemini. So I'm kind of having mine because I'm a Gemini moon, but you'll have your year as a Leo, and then 2 years later you'll have your year as a Libra rising and Libra moon.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
I have, I should have a video. There's a gal that I met through the Coincidence Project who's an astrologer. And I know she has more than one book. I think it's called More Plutos. But she's in this, uh, probably a very small number of astrologers who are assessing and delineating the newest planets. And she did a reading for me around my birthday with 4 of them I've never heard of, including where they are in my birth chart,
Hmm.
and opened up some amazing, like, oh my God, something, an essence of me that had never been given in a reading before, because these archetypes were not there.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that would be interesting to you,
Oh yeah, definitely.
but and she's a real nerd, very detailed and very, like a scientist
Yep.
about all this. Her name is Sue Keats. I'll see if I don't, I'll ask her to send it to me. But I think she sent me.
Yeah,
Well,
we could maybe do some interviews with people too.
yeah, definitely. I'm sure we both know people. I have some friends that I just adore. A couple of, and one is a fellow Buddhist practitioner who had a radio show for older women locally for quite a few years, and is just a beautiful human being, wonderful listener, someone who has also has the talent which you have, and mine may be a little rusty because I'm so often the one being interviewed. But I used to, when I had my songwriters newsletter for 16 years, I was very good at listening and pulling out pulling out the kind of things that make somebody say, well, that's a great question. Because then you know you're onto something
Yeah.
when someone says that to you.
Hmm.
So,
Definitely.
yeah.
Well, cool. We'll figure out a weekend day where we can do like a formal episode and
Yeah.
then have like a polished product. I think, yeah, especially without me having distractions, not that they can't be serendipitous and maybe add to it, but I tend to just not feel like my mind is in multiple places at once when I don't have other things going on, especially if I'm working and I know I might get
Right.
a message or something and I'm sort of half looking at what's going on in my other computers. So it'll just be better for the end product if
Sure.
cut that out. But yeah, well, I mean, I can even do it so like I'm doing episodes with you on the opposite weekends of the ones I do with Sophia. So
That's nice.
yeah,
And, and I love that we can pick a topic, uh, even take turns picking topics, and we both bring our experience to whatever it is and can give way to one another where your voice or my voice is the most relevant to the moment, whatever that might be about, and where there are when there is a pre decided, like, I want to accomplish something within the context of it. It could be 5 minutes of it, like wanting to introduce um, the way that I teach the psychology of cells, I think would interest anybody watching. And I draw, it's drawing and whatever. So
okay.
it's visual. So there's a visual that goes with it. And that needs to be set up, and tends to work better if I use a large, I don't know that I could do that on a whiteboard on Zoom. I've never tried anything like that.
Neither have I, but
I
we
don't
could.
even
Oh,
that. Okay, so it's holding up something or holding something in place and trying to draw. I haven't done that for a couple of years, but I did it on several Zoom classes. Or the little, I'd be curious to see whether or not that exchange that we had is viable, is a little
yeah.
viable piece of something for us. And when you talk, that thing about the bugs was quite lovely, the whole of that. For
Like,
people who are high sensitives and people who really care about harmlessness,
hmm.
so forth. That was a beautiful exchange.
Well, I just washed my car this morning because I drove yesterday and I was like, wow, that's a lot of death. It's just like, it's incredible.
That's a great intro to the piece, what you just said. Yeah, that's true.
Well, I'm sure there'll be plenty more exchanges like this. So I'm sure we have a lot of untapped potential here.
Yes. Mm.
Well,
Yes, and I tend to be all revved up a lot. You know, so settle. There's room and time for everything.
yeah, well, it's great chatting with you as always. It's a pleasure
Yeah,
to see you, and I look forward to the next time we chat.
me too. And I think that I will be going into the little town of Windsor, which is right near 3/10 of a mile up the road officially, 3 miles into the town. Um, the post office there, and get this off in the mail to you. It usually takes about a week. I send it media,
Okay. Yeah, that'd be
but
perfect.
yeah, it's been. They tell you it could take up to 2 weeks. It's usually within 5 to 7 days.
Perfect. Yeah, I'm only like halfway across the US, so it won't
Yeah,
quite as long as if it's going to Maine or something.
yeah. So may you have a beautiful rest of living
Thank
a
you.
day with your kid and her
Yeah,
friend.
yeah, I'm gonna try to take them to the park here once I get a little bit of work done since my day's not quite done, but yeah, then get them outside for a little while.
Yeah, and if it makes sense to thank them on my behalf for having let us talk, I
Yeah,
would love for them to know that I really thought that was just very lovely that it happened that way, whether it was intended or not.
yeah, I will let them know. We'll
Appreciate
see
that.
what they say.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
they'd be like, okay,
okay, I'll let you go.
okay, well, I'll talk to you soon, Marcia. Have a great day.
Bye for now. Thank you.